we have this Phalaenopsis that looks like it's growing incredibly well. It's got all these nice big leaves that have just come out and another new growth on the way. And it's got all these amazing roots coming out, even inside the pot. But I've noticed some signs that this needs to be repotted. So why would you want to repot an orchid that's growing like this? Well, today we're going to show you exactly why this needs to be repotted and why your others that are in the similar sort of state will also need to be. Welcome to the Nature Company. If this is the kind of information you're interested in, please hit that subscribe button down below if you haven't already, and that notification bell to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. So even when your orchid is growing this beautifully, you're thinking, I'm going to get some amazing flowers. Well, you probably might, but your orchid is slowly going to go backwards and cause you some troubles. So let's look at those early signs that we need to look out for to understand why this plant is actually not as healthy as it looks. Initially, what we're looking at is these slightly older leaves that are already becoming limp. The actual full new leaves themselves are a little bit leathery. They haven't quite started to wilt or go limp yet. We also notice that our plant is growing off to one direction. This means it's not getting enough light in the position that it was sitting in to start with, and so it's been growing towards the light. And then you ask, what about all these amazing new roots in the pot? Well, we'll go in and have a look and see what's happening there to show you why this is the ideal point to have this repotted. Also, we have this yellow discoloration on one of the older leaves. We can see it starting to twist in on the sides, which is the signs of dehydration. And yellowing tip could be first signs of nutrient deficiency. There are also other reasons that this yellowing could be happening. But if we at least get into the pot now, before this shows any further signs of possible damage, then we can rectify this before it becomes really problematic. So what we're going to do is use one hand to support the plant and the other hand to lightly squeeze around the pot so we can loosen it up. Also, for ease of repotting, it's always a good idea to give your plant a good watering at least 24 hours before to get all those roots turgid and to make them more malleable so that they're not quite so brittle. Yeah, just removing all the media and loosening the roots. Okay, we can see there is a lot of old dead root matter in here, and this is one of the reasons that we needed to repot this. If these roots then start to rot, we'll then cause that rot to pass through into the new roots, and that's going to be detrimental to the whole plant. Also, if the roots had been dying like this, there's a reason. Either the media's gone off or something else has been happening inside the pot that we don't want to affect these new roots and the new growth. So best to get in as quickly as possible to rectify. Yeah, we'll notice with this Phalaenopsis, we still have the original plug that it was growing in. This also has to be removed. This holds way too much moisture for in and around your pot, and there we can see in the center all those old roots are actually rotten. This could bring fungal attacks and bacteria and all those bad things that are going to cause damage to your plant. So we'll just remove those all out. Here we can see these yellowing roots are still viable roots. The reason that they are yellow is because they've been deep inside the pot and haven't been getting any light. Often yellow roots are not something to be worried about, especially if you can feel that they're still turgid and they're still functioning, they're not squishy or mushy or dried out, then they're still viable, good roots. Just slowly, carefully untwist all the roots that have been growing in and around each other. Let's just remove this so we can get this on a nice flat surface to work more easily with it. Okay, so now we're going to look for all those dead roots. A lot of these have dried out and desiccated completely and have just gone through some dehydration event, and we're going to have to remove all of those. All the squishy roots seem to have come off with that original plug. So what we'll do is we'll just sanitize our equipment. and go in and cut these dead roots off right at the base of the stem. So we don't want to leave any of that dead matter sitting around the plant. Yeah, we can check where there are some roots that look like they're still viable, but there's also some dried ends. So all we'll do is we'll go in and cut off those dried sections, leaving the rest of the root intact. We have these old flower spikes that have dried out. These we can cut right back to at the base of the stem. If you've damaged any viable roots during this unpotting process and stripped it back to the steel, then also remove it right at the base where you had caused that first part of damage, because the rest of the root will die out. This is why you want nice, sharp, long-nosed secateurs to get into those spots so you don't damage anything else while you're removing the dead sections that you want to take off. Okay, you want to make sure you remove all this old potting material that might still be stuck to any of the roots. Here we can see we have fresh root growth, although there's a desiccated section here. So what we're going to do is just remove that whole section back to viable tissue, because this will die out. And we notice that there was algae growing on it, and we don't necessarily want to spread that algae to the new pot. The algal growth isn't necessarily a terrible problem for the orchid itself. It just will reduce the plant's ability to photosynthesize through the roots by covering up that root volume. But if we're putting it into a solid pot, the roots aren't going to be photosynthesizing anyway, and without that light coming in, that algae will die. Okay, if we can just get in and remove some of this other old leaf sheaths from around the base of the orchid as well, we can just also thereby limit the possible infections from this rotting as well. And also by doing it, we can check for any insects that might be hiding in underneath it. Also, it will make it easier for the new roots to emerge from the stem. So just be careful when you're doing it that you don't damage any of these root buds or root nodes as you strip it off. So just be careful when removing all this old material. It's easier to do if the roots are still slightly moist. It's easier to do if the material is still slightly damp from that watering overnight. But try not to work with the roots when they are wet, because it's easier for any fungal or bacteria to be transferred and transmitted across to new cuts. So seeing that algae growing in and around the pot and on the roots themselves, we're going to want to be using our trusty garlic tonic to give that a good spray to ensure that that algae will not cause any problems later. And we'll give those roots a good spray. Also, this garlic is an excellent tonic to help orchids recover from transplant shock and recover from all manner of maltreatments. So we'll just ensure that we moisten off the whole plant, including the undersides of the leaves, into those gaps between the leaves. So if there is any insects hiding in there, those can be flushed out. We can hold this upside down to drip out all the excess moisture from in between the leaves. And then just give this a moment to dry out a bit before we transplant. And with Phalaenopsis, often you'll find them, they come in the clear pots, but these are not essential for growing your Phalaenopsis in. The added advantage of these clear pots, it's easy to monitor the roots to check for any root rot or any infections that might be taking place in the root area. Also, Phalaenopsis can photosynthesize from their roots. Their roots will start to get a greenish color, not necessarily from the algae, but the root itself. This is allowing extra photosynthesis for the plant itself, but this is generally only necessary if the plant is in really dark conditions. If you're giving it a bright enough area that your leaves can do all the photosynthesis, your roots don't need to. And often you'll find people who buy them in these clear plastic pots, then put them into a cover pot for the aesthetic value, and then you're avoiding the value of the clear pot anyway. I'm going to be planting it in this rather large pot, which is against a lot of advice that you may have heard previously, but we'll show you why I'm doing it, how I'm doing it, that will make this work. For one, this pot has a reservoir at the bottom with a lid over the top, so it will allow water or air to be stored at the bottom. There are holes still in the bottom and the reservoir release. If you have to travel a lot for work purposes and such, and you're worried about your orchids, this is often a really good idea with this water reservoir at the bottom, that you can be away for several weeks without worrying about your orchid not having enough water. And then you ask me, what about root rots? Everyone tells me they need to be squished in tight into a small pot. Well, if you think of it in nature, they're growing on trees. Those roots are hardly squished into a small pot, are they? But we do have to be more careful with the material we use to pot it up with. And hence, instead of using the small bark chunks or the coir, these both hold water for fairly long periods of time, which in a small pot where the drainage is good, the excess moisture is essential. But when you're going with a larger pot, you've got a larger volume of media in here, it's going to take longer for the media in the middle to then dry out. So we're going to be using these large chunks that's going to give good air movement in and around the media. We'll be using a little bit of charcoal as the inorganic part of the media that will help not only clear the water, that will help remove contaminants and still allow for that excellent air movement, as it leaves lots of air gaps. And it's going to dry really quickly. It's not going to hold moisture. Now, when potting up our orchid, we have the original roots that were in the pot, and we have all these new aerial roots that have been growing out over the top of the pot and above the media. So it's only these original roots that were in the media that we're going to be planting back into media. The aerial roots we're still going to allow to grow out into the air as they were originally. If we now put these in under the media too deep, what's going to happen is, because they've adapted themselves to a drier condition, if we put them in somewhere that's going to be too moist, they will just rot. We'll let those that want to grow down into the media grow into the media themselves, and as they grow in, they'll adapt to the more moist environment. So we'll gently just spread our roots out nicely in and around the pot, giving them space to be able to grow. And then filling it in. Just mixing some of that charcoal in between. We're trying to reset our plant up more vertically. And just to ensure that we keep our plant upright while it resets itself into its new growing position, we'll just use a stake. And all we're going to do now is give this bark a gentle soaking to ensure that the moistened bark that we have is not going to suck any further moisture from the roots. Also, we've measured the amount of water that the reservoir is going to take, so we're not overflowing it. This is now not going to get water for another at least 2 to 3 weeks. If you are going to be watering your orchid more frequently, remove the plug from the reservoir, so that you're not keeping water in here all the time. But it does come in handy for those times when you're going to be away and you don't have anyone to orchid sit. Also, a good thing with having the reservoir at the bottom without having water in it is you now have an air layer at the bottom of your orchid that will help that air circulation right through the pot, allowing air to those roots, which is essential, especially for orchids like Phalaenopsis, which are epiphytic. Also, if you do, make sure you're managing your water properly and measuring the amount in your reservoir often enough, and you want to keep your plug in, then you can help maintain a high humidity level around your Phalaenopsis, especially if you're in a low humidity environment. It's all about managing your plant and what it needs to the best of your ability. So if you're a frequent traveler and you need an easy way out, this is an ideal way to look after your Phalaenopsis while you're away. If you appreciate our content, please hit us up on the Buy Me a Coffee link below. We also have bonus content there for you. And if you need any specialized tailored advice, we've got a link for you there too. And thank you for watching. If you found any of this information helpful, please hit that like button, hit that subscribe button down below, and that notification bell, bing bong, to be notified of all our upcoming content so you don't miss out on a thing. Help us grow as we help your orchids grow.